All right, we will get started here. So again, thank you for everyone attending today. This is webinar 4 of our Disinfect and Protect series. And in previous webinars, we've discussed a lot about reopening with gyms, disinfect and protect. I'm just going to give you a couple highlights, and we're really in this webinar we're focusing in on air handling, and really thrilled and honored to have our presenter here today. But if you've missed the other webinars, we've posted a lot of them on our website, and those recordings and any of the documentation is available here that we can provide to you. But we've really tried to educate people prior to getting into phase 1 or phase 2, depending on where you're at, and when these gyms are going to reopen, and what you can do in planning and preparation for this. So there's a lot to consider. In the gym environment, it's very different than pools, other amenity areas. So please, the biggest advice I can give anyone here in this is we want to protect the people that are returning to the gym. We want to protect the people that are involved in maintenance and service and janitorial type applications here in the gym. It is a very different environment. There are specific solutions with disinfectant and protectant that can help, and that some of them can actually hinder the equipment if applied improperly or the wrong solution is used. So again, lots to consider here with disinfect and protect. Reopening, again, lots of considerations that we've been providing with signage, flow, limitations, how to put machines out of order, redesigning your whole entire layout space. Please, go back to these resources that we've provided, and plan now. It takes time to put these things into place. And as you know, this is a very fluid situation, whether we will be open tomorrow, a week from now, things change. And you can rest assured your patrons, residents, users, they're going to want to know exactly what you're doing as soon as those things, mandates necessarily change. So figure it out now, communicate, build the plan on how you will react. So really, without any further ado, I would love to have you kick it off here, Steve. Steve is the president and CEO of AtmosAir Solutions. This, I think, is a tremendous solution and complement to what we've been doing here in the webinar to educate people, and also how we maintain some reassurance and obviously safety in a big factor that we have in these fitness facilities. It's indoors, sometimes small, confined, and we need to do something about the air. It's not just the surfaces that we should be concerned about treating. It's the air that we're breathing. So, Steve, take it away.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Jeff. Really appreciate this, and really looking forward to working with Heartline Fitness and really educating everybody today on improved air quality and where we came from and what AtmosAir is all about. So if you go right into the next slide, Jeff. The air is better here, and that's the theme for today. And if you go to the next slide, our company has been in Fairfield, Connecticut now since early 2000. We started as an air testing company. We would actually go into buildings and test air quality, the 11 different elements of air quality, and write a 30-page report on what the overall air quality was. But we couldn't help it. We couldn't make it better. So we had to get on the solution side of things, because not everyone wanted to know what their air quality was. If it was bad, how are you going to affect it? How are you going to make it better? So we found, after looking at numerous technologies, filters, UV lights, electrostatic air cleaners, carbon, everything, we found a technology in Sweden that we got our arms around, and we were able to bring it over to the United States. And we tested it. The technology was called bipolar ionization. Didn't truly love the name bipolar, so we changed and branded it AtmosAir in 2008. And today we have over 80 million square feet that has AtmosAir within facilities, over 7,500 buildings. Everybody's wondering today, you've got to know our phones are ringing off the hook. You know, how are you keeping up with it with this whole coronavirus issue and whatnot? We're going to get into that in detail. But we have a strong manufacturing out there. We have a public company, Keytronics, that's our arm of manufacturing, and we have a number of patents on the technology. So we're very proud, and we have over 160 dealers and many offices around the country. So again, very glad to be part of Heartline and how we can help you tell your customers how to improve air quality and create cleaner, healthier environments. So if we go to the next slide, Jeff. We're in a lot of different disciplines, as you can imagine. Commercial office space. We just actually finished 1 million square feet for Brookfield, 250 Vesey Street in New York, and just finished the JP Morgan headquarters in New York, and now working on the Empire State Building. Do a lot of work in healthcare. A lot of schools have our technology. Hospitality, we have a major partnership going on with Hilton right now. They want us to put our technology in over 5,000 rooms. And sports has been probably where we started and where we have been most effective, because we've educated most of the sports facilities out there, professional, college, schools. But we started professionally because we figured if we can put our technology in all the professional sports venues, that will trickle down to colleges and trickle down to schools and eventually trickle down to the consumer. And so over the 17 years, we have a tremendous amount of sports facilities, as we're going to tell you about. Lots of airports, convention centers, government buildings, everybody that's focused on indoor air purification today and it's been an education process with the architects and the engineers. But today, everybody's actually calling, seeing where can they get this technology, because as Jeff said, it doesn't only improve the air we breathe in the air, but also affects the surfaces at the same time. So if we go to the next slide. These are some of the venues that we have throughout the United States where we have our systems installed, and not just in locker rooms and training rooms, but we just finished the US Bank Stadium, the entire stadium where the Minnesota Vikings play. And they put our technology in every single air handler throughout the entire venue. We've done that in the Staples Center, and we've done that in the Rocket Mortgage Arena in Cleveland. And just got off the phone just a bit ago with the Houston Texans, and they want to put it in the Reliance Stadium. So, and then we have a number of other facilities that we have our systems in just the training area, locker rooms area, weight room areas, all the critical areas in a training facility. Lots of sports teams have their own separate training facilities that are about 100,000 square feet. And we put them in throughout the air handlers in those areas. And we can put it in as little as one room within a facility as well. Some people like to try it before they want it everywhere. So we have the ability to do that as well. If we go to the next slide. We also recently, I shouldn't say recently, a couple years now, we've made a global partnership with Johnson Controls. Everybody should know JCI, Johnson Controls, is a big venue manager and also service provider for air conditioning equipment, but security equipment and whatnot. And so they came to us because their largest customer came to them, Hospital Corporation of America, and said, you know, we want a technology that's more active than passive. You know, most technologies, most filters and UVs and electrostatic air cleaners are all on the return side of the air. They're all passive in nature. We want something that's more active, that actually goes after the contaminants in the space and does it actively. And so that's what our technology does. And Johnson Controls now is branding our technology everywhere with their clients, and it's really given us a global strength, a global partnership all over the world with them. So, next slide. We've been getting a lot of press recently. New York Post a couple weeks ago, Business Insider, Forbes magazine. This week, end of the week or next week, you'll see a big article in Associated Press. Everybody's focused on how they can make their buildings better, how they can make their gyms and facilities better, and basically how our technology will help in doing that. And I'll say that there's no one technology that's a silver bullet. It's an overall process, right? We're still saying you have to wash your hands, you have to clean surfaces, you should change your filters, but as one more layer of overall solution, put in the bipolar ionization, put in the AtmosAir, so it brings you this continuous disinfection. And that's what we're all about today. One more layer of defense. If you go to the next slide. This is a most recent job we did, Brookfield Properties. I just talked about it. It's 1 million square feet. And I put it up here because Brookfield and other groups now are highlighting the technology. They really want to see that the technology and tell their employees and their tenants and whatnot, when you come back to our building, it's going to be with this technology in it to make you feel safer and to create this decontamination and sanitation effect. When we actually asked them to put our technology in, the process we go through is we need to know, the number of air handlers within the facility. We need to know the areas that they serve. We need to know the size of the air handlers in what we call CFM or tonnage, and that'll determine how much equipment we need to service this type of facility. So if you go to the next slide, there's a very large architectural firm called Gensler. And if you haven't heard of Gensler, they are the world's largest interiors architectural firm. When they saw our technology, they said, can we try it in one of our facilities? And so they actually, back in LA, they were moving from Santa Monica into a new facility in downtown LA. They actually said, let us test it there. And Steve, we're not going to put the system in right away. We're going to commission our building and move in for 6 months. And then 6 months, you come in and let's pre-test the air with an outside third party. And then we'll put your system in and see if it's actually made the air that much better. And when we did that, and we showed them, even though they had great air quality to begin with, and their particle levels were a 6, which on a scale of 1 to 25, a 6 is pretty good, 1 being the best. And their VOC level, though, was at a 25, 1 being the best. And we were able to take their VOC level, their volatile organic compound level, down to a 16 inside of 1 week. So it was pretty impressive to them. They basically put the great endorsement to other Gensler offices, and now we've done a number of Gensler offices, but they made a video on the technology, a great 3-minute video. So if you ever want to show your client right away how the technology works, you show them this video, and it's a great way to explain the technology. You can all look at it right after the presentation. Next slide, please. Basically what we're doing is taking airflow that comes into the supply duct, and we're ionizing it with our specially designed bipolar ionization tubes. And when the air goes over these tubes, these negative and positive ions are created. And when they're created, the ions then go into the supply duct, sanitizing the duct, and then they spill out into the space where people are. And then what happens there is pretty exciting. They're actually grabbing onto particles, and they're grabbing onto spores, and they're making them bigger and heavier, so they're much easier to filter out of the air. So it's almost like when you go to the mountain environments. If you ever went to the top of the mountain, you know, wherever, and you breathe that crisp, clean air in, the air is fresh because there's a natural conductivity at the top of that mountain. That conductivity is caused by negative and positive ions. Very plentiful at the top of the mountain. You can actually measure that with an ion meter. There is such a thing. But then when you start going down the mountain, the ions have been depleted because of pollution, because of emissions. When you then get into large cities, the ion content is much less. And then when you get into interior environments, because of people, because of machines, because of carpeting, the ion content is almost nil. So all we're trying to do is raise the level of ionization up. We're never going to make it like a mountaintop, but if you can raise it up 3 or 4 times and then let those ions attack the contaminants in the space, that's basically what we're trying to do, using a little bit of nature to bring back the clean air environment inside of a space. And we want to be left with at least 500 to 1,500 ions in that space. And then we'll know that's the right amount of ions to attack all those contaminants of concern. So if we go to the next slide, please. The process that we call it is agglomeration. This is the process of ions grabbing onto particulate, making little particles bigger, making them heavier, so they're much easier to filter out of the air. But what ions also do is that they destroy certain things like mold spores. You know, mold is very prevalent in humid environments and in the South and whatnot, and it usually causes great problems. But when you ionize a facility, no mold spores can live in an ionized facility, because what the ions actually do is it actually breaks down the DNA of a spore so it can't reproduce. So they basically just die off. What ions also do is they break down VOCs and odors. So when you ionize an odor or a volatile organic compound, it breaks that down into carbon dioxide and water vapor. So it's smelling fresh, it's smelling clean, the odors are away. So like a gym floor that sometimes has that off-gassing of that floor smell, when you ionize that, it breaks that down and will make it CO2 and water vapor, much cleaner and fresher. And then lastly, it has a great effect on different bacteria, on different viruses, and on different germs. And we'll talk about how that happens if we go to the next slide. Because this is the slide everybody's watching on TV, right? This is that spiky ball that is causing all kinds of issues. And unfortunately, in this type of environment, well, I say fortunately, we're able to help many people and save many lives, because our technology really attacks this spiky ball. And it won't help when people are coming person to person in contact, but it will help when a person touches a surface. And let's say that surface is infected, and then somebody else touches that same surface, and now they're infected. So what the ions do, because they're like little Pac-Man, you know, attacking everywhere, millions of them in the space, saturating the space, and attacking not only what's in the air, but it's on surfaces, those ions will go right to the heart of the virus on a surface and deactivate it. Because what ions do are they will penetrate this ball and inactivate this ball so that it can't infect. So even if you ingest, not right now, even if you ingest, you can't get infected with the continuous disinfection running. Okay, so go to the next slide, if you will. Everybody is looking at these pictures on TV, these videos, and wondering how long, when somebody coughs or spews or sneezes, how long that's staying in the air. It's a very big issue today because it seems like I'm hearing everywhere from 20 minutes to hours, how long it's staying in the air. And so the ions, when they grab the particulate and they grab what's in the air and make it bigger and make it heavier, you're actually taking it out of the airspace that much faster. But also the ions are going right to the heart of the bacteria and the virus and actually penetrating it. So even if you ingest it, you're not going to get sick. And that's the key. That's why buildings are using this, because it's allowing, as long as the air systems are moving, it's allowing the ions to get out there and attack all these issues in the air as well as on surfaces as well. So next slide, please. We have a lot of testing and studies on this. We're not just making it up, right? Dr. Phil Tierno is at NYU, and he is in charge of microbiology. And even though he just retired after 50 years, he's done lots of testing on the technology. We've tested this on things in sports environments like staph and MRSA. We've tested this on E. coli. We've tested this on neurovirus, actually a surrogate called MS2 of neurovirus. And we've gotten 99% effective results. And so very, very positive. And we've tested this at Antimicrobial Labs, which is in Texas. It's where you're supposed to go if you want to test on surfaces for hospitals. And then we also were told a couple of years ago we should test on C. diff, C. difficile. C. diff is a superbug that hospitals are deathly concerned about. And we wanted to see how effective our bipolar ionization was on this C. difficile. And the way they test you is over a period of time, they put this on surfaces and they put the ionization on it, and then they basically see how long it takes to reduce the C. diff. And you see here in the first 6 hours, we were able to reduce it by 57%. And then at the 18th hour, we got it up to 99%. So, and then obviously it goes on, it's continuous, the ions are continuous. So it was very effective on breaking down C. diff. And as Dr. Tierno will tell you, on a scale of 1 to 10, C. difficile is about a 7 to break down, 10 being the hardest to break down. Coronavirus is only a 2 to break down. So even though we've tested on H1N1 and H5N1 and SARS and other coronas, we haven't tested on COVID-19. We can't get our hands on it yet, but we are very effective on all these other viruses, and C. diff will prove the point because that's probably one of the hardest things to defeat. We defeated it. If you go to the next slide. So we've also, you know, as a testing company, I'm all about testing and validation, right? It's volatile organic compounds, odors, the #1 place to test in the country for VOCs is at the University of Syracuse. They have a excellence testing lab, that's world renowned, and Dr. Jensen Zwang is there, and he tested the 8 most popular VOCs, and in all of them we were over 90% reduction. Again, taking a bad VOC like a styrene that might be OSHA regulated, and when you ionize that styrene, it will break it down to benzaldehyde. And then when you ionize benzaldehyde, it will break it down to formaldehyde. And then when you ionize formaldehyde, it will break it down into CO2 and water vapor, the end result. And it happens very quickly. So the technology is very good about reducing VOCs. Also, we've tested on reducing particles. Remember I said earlier, the agglomeration of particles? Well, we tested this at ETL, which is the largest testing company in the world. And the way you're graded with how effective you are at removing particles is with a clean air delivery rate test. And we've gotten a very high score with that test because we reduce 86% of the particulate. So those dust particles that are in the air that you see in the sunlight, when you ionize them, they become bigger, they become heavier, so they're much easier to filter out of the air. And lastly, on the testing we said before of bacteria, on viruses, on germs, we're all in the high 99 percentile, or at least except for MS2, which is 95 percentile. So very effective on reducing bacteria, viruses, and germs. If you go to the next slide, these are what our technology looks like. It almost look like missile launchers, if you will, but they're bipolar ionization tubes. When we first brought them over from Europe, they were glass. And to be honest with you, glass was fragile. So we did have some breakage issues if you put them in the airstream or if they fell. But back in 2012, our R&D team created them to be a composite tube, which made them shatterproof and also made them last a lot longer than the glass tubes, which only lasted a year. These composite tubes last for 2 years. So once the system's installed, the only maintenance is every 2 years, you just have to unscrew the tube like a light bulb, put a new tube on, and you're good to go. And whether we install them on the supply duct or in the air handler, this one on the left, the 508, is the biggest system we have. This covers about 15,000 CFM. And as you'll see on the picture on the left, there's 2 of them there on the duct. That means it's 30,000 CFM. So it's a 30,000 square foot location. So whether it's 100,000 square foot or 1,000,000 square foot like US Bank Stadium, you know, we can scale this for however big or small your opportunity is. And then we have controls on there that can be wired in so that, you know, at the building management system, we can tell that it's working, and ownership can tell that it's working, and you can actually monitor that as well, which we'll talk about as we go forward. And also, you know, so you know, ionization, sometimes people think of ionization, they say, well, is it giving off something that's harmful? Is there any ozone concern? Well, all of our products have been tested to UL 867. So there is no ozone concern, you know, with our technology. There's no measurable ozone in the space at all. Next slide. And this is a couple of variety of pictures of how the systems are installed. On the left, you know, a much larger air handler. We can rack mount the technology and put it in there so it's easily serviced. Or in the middle picture, we can put it on the supply ducts. And you'll see that wire coming out is just a power wire. It just has to be plugged in, you know, and energized. If it's a small application on the right side, I remember when I brought the technology over, my dad said, you know, make me one for my house. I want clean air in my house. And so, He basically, we made a one tube system that can cover up to 2,000 CFM, plug it in, energize it, you have clean air throughout the house. And then in the bottom right, we scaled it down to a very small tube, about a 2-inch tube that can go into a fan coil unit, a heat pump unit, or even a PTEC unit, so that it can ionize the air within a smaller space, a 300 or 400 square foot space. I mean, my goals and my dreams are to get this onto in a car. I want people breathing clean air when they're driving in a car, and on a plane and on a train as well. But, you know, to be continued there. Next slide, please. Some of our larger installations, you can see, I think one of these might be the Staples Center or TD Garden or Milwaukee Stadium, you know, Rocket Mortgage. You know, when you got a big air handler, you just put a series of them on the air handler itself and then plug them right in. You can see all of them on the left were plugged into one power source. So these devices don't need a whole lot of power. Next slide, please. Again, here's this was, I guess, the Vikings. I don't know why this is here, but this is the Vikings' new headquarters that we're putting a system into. And, you know, when we look at the areas they serve and the amount of systems that take, and then on the right side, we put a diagram as to where our system goes. We want it on the supply side of the air system because after the fan and after the filter, so that we can get as many ions into the space as possible. You know, the more ions getting to the target, the better. And you know, ions, negative and positive ions, sometimes they meet up and they marry up and they die off. So the interesting thing with our ions and the way our patent works is that the ions pulsate. They both don't come out together. They pulsate, negative, then positive, then negative, then positive. And what that does is it makes the ion more sustainable. It'll last longer in the space, which is where we want it to be. So next slide, please. You know, so how do you tell it's working? Again, all about validation and verification. And you put it in, and how can you tell? Well, obviously, if you had the system in and you were able to, you see the, feel the air quality, it feels much fresher, much cleaner. When we did Hilton, 5 feet to fitness rooms, they said, here's 5 rooms, put your system in 2 of those 5 rooms. We want to see if we can tell the difference. And we put the systems in 2 of those 5 rooms, and they were able to tell the difference right away, because when you walk in, it's just so much fresher and crisper with the technology. Ions do that. And so, but in some of the larger systems, what we've done is we've created an in-duct monitoring system, a sensor. So this is on the return side of the air. Our system that purifies is on the supply side of the air. So when the air comes back through the return side, we're measuring the particles, we're measuring the carbon dioxide, the VOC, carbon monoxide, ozone, temperature, relative humidity, even formaldehyde we can measure. And then we can make sure that it tracks and trends the data. It can track and trend it right on the BMS system, the building management system. And you can actually see that in real time. So now we've taken the invisible and we've made it visible. So if you go to the next slide, this is what somebody would see on their building management system. And if you blow it up, you would see it's temperature, relative humidity, all the things I talked about. You would see this in real time. This happens to be level 100 quad D. This is at Levi's Stadium where the 49ers play. And they installed our system a year or so ago in their training room, in their athletic room, and now they want to put the system in all of the interior environments at the stadium. Again, it's coronavirus related. They want to protect their fans. They want to protect their people and their employees. And obviously they want to protect their players. So next slide, please. Also, we have an in-room sensor so that as their people are becoming more transparent, and I believe that this is the way the world is going, you can have a cover on this and just have it sense, the different elements of air quality, the same PM 2.5 and VOCs and carbon dioxide and temperature and humidity. You can have it just sense those things and record the data at your BMS, or you can actually show people, when they walk into the building, what's my air quality in the building versus outside. And I think you're going to see this in more and more building lobbies, in more and more elevators, in more and more tenant spaces, where you're going to be able to track and trend the data and at least give employees confidence that the air quality that they're breathing is healthy and clean. And if it's not, it's got to be fixed. This can be separate and apart from our actual air purification system, but when you tie them both together, the air quality will always stay the way it needs to be and better. Next slide, please. This is a neat device. We actually can watch the air quality now on the phone, on your own phone, and you can trend your data on your own phone. And on the right there, CBRE, a big property management company, has our systems at their offices in Shanghai, in China, and we were able to send them weekly reports now, because the air quality in China is not all that good, and they want to see the air quality in their own space as compared to outside. So this is kind of this reporting that we do, and we're trying to create an overall global index for what's good air quality, what's acceptable air quality, and you'll hear more about that hopefully in the coming months. Next slide, please. Now, then go back one, if you would, Jeff. If you go back one, this is interesting, because when we first brought the technology over, we brought it over to show an improved air quality. But when you clean the air so well and you're able to recycle clean air, there's actually the ability to reduce energy costs. So think about, every building is bringing in so much outside air, and when you bring in that outside air, what are you bringing in with it? So if you don't have to bring in that much outside air and you can recycle clean air, there's less heating and cooling costs. And so we proved with our system, and it's all acceptable by ASHRAE, that you can save up to 20 to 40% on your HVAC power demand, which will trend to about 4 to 8% on your entire energy bill, while you're able to extend the lives of your filters and extend the life of your equipment. So it's a real neat opportunity to be more sustainable by adding cleaner air. Next slide. And we've tracked that. We have benchmarking. This is actually Minnesota's benchmarking. We like to validate and verify even the energy savings, if you will. You go to the next slide. Now, some people will say, well, how does this compare to UV light versus your AtmosAir? And UV is a good technology. You put UV on the coils, or you put it on the drain pan, and it will keep that clean of bacteria, viruses, and germs. The problem is, it doesn't do much in the space where people are, because it needs contact time. It needs line of sight. And you can't put UV in your line of sight, because you'll damage your retina. But the bipolar ions, you can. and people live with the bipolar ions running all the time. And the ions basically will attack the virus and will attack odors and the particulates. And it's very safe to use. People go to the mountains to breathe cleaner, fresher air. It's much safer to use. Next slide. Then just a variety of sports facilities we do. I know this is a focus of your company, and being able to say that we're in the top professional sports teams and a number of college teams that utilize the technology. And especially when we start going back and kids start going back to schools and having, you know, this type of technology inside, very, very beneficial. The Patriots put in the technology because they wanted to get an edge. And, you know, they're always looking for that edge. But what Jim Whalen found out, who's the head trainer for the New England Patriots, is that he didn't have to give out as much Zyrtec and Claritin while the guys were working out with our technology, because those people that had allergies and asthma had a much better breathing experience, breathing cleaner air without the dust, without the pollen, without the spores. So there's a lot of evidence that this technology really helps when it comes to you know, having to give out those type of medications. And 1 out of 4 people are affected by allergies and asthma today. Next slide. Energy savings, you know, out of order, but this is an interesting fact. You know, Minnesota Vikings put in the system, and we said, we think we're going to save them a couple $100,000 in energy. And in 6 months or 3 months, we saved them almost that same couple $100,000, because very colder environment. And again, if you don't have to bring in as much outside air, lesser air that you have to heat. Okay, next slide. And then just a couple of bigger clients that we do this in the Dallas Cowboys complete facility. Jim Maurer, who's the head trainer there, loves the technology, and they've put this technology throughout the Cowboys offices now and whatnot. It started in the training area, and because the training room was smelling better and feeling better than the rest of the offices, they decided to put it throughout the rest of the facility. So that's what happens when you can really tell the difference in clean, healthy air. And next slide, Jeff. Staples Center, one of our biggest opportunities that we were able to convince one of the tougher engineers in the world. He didn't believe this technology would work, but we convinced him to try it on one air handler. And after trying it for 1 year on the one air handler, and he saw the savings that he got, and he saw the betterment of air quality, he put it throughout every air handler. And now the Staples Center and is helping the NBA rewrite a lot of the when we go back to stadiums and we start going back to the games, you know, what those stadiums should be doing as part of their overall effort to better air quality, and AtmosAir is part of that. So pretty neat. Next slide. And then obviously some other big venues that we do. Jeff, you can scroll through a couple of these. And I just want to leave us open for questions. Obviously in the workspace, every workspace has gyms and facilities within them. What'll happen is you put them in that facility, and I guarantee you it's going to gravitate throughout the rest. Hospitals the same way. You put them in an area in a hospital, whether it's an operating room or an emergency room or whatnot, and then it gravitates throughout the rest of the hospital. We've proven that. Schools, in a big way, every school has got so many buildings on campus, and we typically start with one building, and then it gravitates to many more buildings on campus. And then finally, a lot of airports. When we get back to traveling one day, when that happens, you know, hopefully you're going to be breathing better air in airports, because, you know, airports are starting to really look at this technology, and we have it in many airports at this time, but, you know, it's got to be more of a standard. and hospitality when you're starting to stay in Hilton. And I just got a couple of new Moxie hotels from Marriott that they want this system in, and now Hyatt's starting to put this in. It's becoming really on the hospitality side one of those important items that people are really focused on. Not just health and wellness, it's health and safety and wellness, and I think that's really where it's going. And then lastly, I mean, how good do you have to be to take smoke out of the air, you know, in a casino? And our technology can actually do that. And now we're talking to casinos about putting in this for virus protection and whatnot, and as another opportunity to get their clients back in and feel safer. They might not be smoking, they might be wearing masks in the casino, but they will be breathing cleaner, healthier air. And with that, Jeff, that concludes my presentation, and open for any questions.
Well, wow. I don't know what the right word is here, but I feel like I went back maybe 20 years, 25 years to college, and the education I just got on something that is extraordinary. And I think immensely important that we facilitate the education of this product in the space as unique as the fitness center and what we're contending with COVID-19. So I greatly appreciate your time, and thank you for bringing this resource to all of us. Honestly, we're all in need of this type of technology. So with that, we do have some questions, and we'll go into our Q&A session right now. And I think we've got about 14 questions here, and we'll take it all the way. I think we can probably get through all of these. So let's. Does it work at indoor aquatic facilities? For example, the U.S. Olympic Training Center in Colorado Springs.
So we're actually we're doing the U.S. Olympic ice skating ring in Lake Placid right now. Aquatic. So the issue in aquatic center is typically chlorine, and in order to break down the chlorine, you do have to over ionize somewhat, because that's a tougher chemical to break down. But yes, it will have an effect. It will have a positive effect. Obviously, clean the airspace. But in aquatic centers, they're also trying to reduce odors and reduce that chlorine smell. So it will have an effect if it's engineered correctly for that.
Great. A question from Julia. And is it ever possible to get this done this year? Even possible. So I'm assuming installing this type of system.
Yeah. Timing wise, so as you can imagine, since this pandemic hit, we've been extremely busy. Our contract manufacturers keeping up with it the best they can. If somebody said, Steve, I want this today, unfortunately, it probably wouldn't be installed till the end of June, might be into the beginning of July right now. It's we are working hard to get that back down to our 3 to 4 weeks normal delivery time, but right now it's standing at about 7 weeks. And but yes, it can be done this year. Will be done this year, but timing is get your purchase orders in, because it's everybody has to wait in line right now.
Yeah, and I just to compliment that too, Steve, in relevance to all the other things that are disinfecting and protecting with the state of affairs right now. That's great. That's actually reasonable timing to have this solution put in your facility.
Well, a lot of parts from different types of systems are coming from overseas, and that's the hardest. Most of our stuff is here in the United States. We make everything in the United States, so it's really neat for that factor, but also to have it here and have it readily available is a big deal.
Yeah. Another question here. We're only 1,800 square feet. Ballpark about what this would cost to install. And maybe, Steve, you want to elaborate on, that question. I'm sure for me, when we first talked about this, I'm like, okay, when can you put it in my house, right? So
right.
Some residential type numbers.
Yeah. So think about typical square footage, if you were going to put it in a 2,000 square foot house, one system, you'd probably be in the $1,700 range to install. So I always look at it as a metric. If we were doing this and it was 75 to 85 cents per square foot, that's typically or we do it per CFM because it's more from airflow, but airflow and square footage about the same. 75 to 85 cents to install, and then every 2 years to replace the tubes. Figure it's going to be about 14 cents, 12 to 14 cents every 2 years to replace the tubes, which comes out to about a couple $100 a tube, something in that range.
Great, thank you. Question from Kelly. With all the heavy ionized matter dropping, is it necessary to dust or vacuum with more frequency?
Good question. Good question. In the first 2 days, you might see more dust than you've seen because obviously it's working in the duct system and it's cleaning it out. But it's, you're talking about dust is invisible. You might see a little bit more in the first 2 days, but then that will go away. My wife always says, Steve, I don't see any dust in the house. I don't see dust on the TV screens. I don't see it on the pictures because the ions are grabbing that dust, making it bigger, making it heavier, and pulling it out of the airstream. You will see in the beginning, maybe 1 or 2 days, if you have it in the ducts, but after that, just clean, less dust. And also, the thing I should mention is ionization, bipolar ionization neutralizes static. So you can't get a static shock when you have the bipolar ionization running. So it neutralizes static.
Great. So I'll answer this one question from Julie. Excellent data, obviously. Can we have a copy of the presentation? Steve, you and I will work to see if this is, exchangeable. We are recording this, so
Sure.
the full presentation is available. Another fairly pointed question here, and again, I'll elaborate on this next one here. Is there's not a whole lot of things out there that are 100% sure, right? You're not going to get infected. Even the disinfectants that are out there, 99%. The testing that's been done. There's no silver bullet in any of this. So these questions do come up in these webinars. This particular one, how much confidence do you have that AtmosAir helps specifically against coronavirus, and that by installing the system will help the gym populations be safer in that environment? So great question, but I would preface with, look, there's a lot of things we need to do and a lot of things that we can do. It doesn't just take one and it gets in your mouth or your nose or whatever. There's several of these viruses that actually need to infect you, from the studies and the readings that I've had. But you want to answer that question the best you can here for our guests.
Sure. I mean, I agree with you, Jeff. There's no one silver bullet there, and you can't help what happens outside and other places that might happen in the gym, and then we're not going to, if somebody's coming up and giving high fives in the gym and, hugging and this and that, I mean, person to person, we can't be effective either. But as one more layer of protection, I can say this: they'll be safer with the ions running. They'll positively be safer and healthier. And when they're touching surfaces, if the ions are, if the system is on and the ions are hitting those surfaces and the ions are hitting throughout the air, people will be, they can't get infected breathing ionized air. The ions will attack that air. But there is no one thing. I still recommend washing hands first and foremost, still recommend changing filters, and still recommend cleaning surfaces. This is one more layer of protection to get you towards that 100%, because we all know nothing is 100%.
Great. Just a couple questions more here, and we'll keep going. Julia had a question: who do we contact for assessments in Atlanta? Heartline covers up and down the East Coast. Then we have operations in the Mid-Atlantic. So obviously, just contact us. Phone number or help at Heartline Fitness. Second question here. Sounds great. We lease our space. If our landlord doesn't want to pay for any of this, how would we move forward? And I think we've focused on a couple of the applications here, but you actually have some other things I think you can elaborate on with that question, right? With how, if you couldn't
Sure.
put it in events, is there other ways to attack this?
Sure. So most of the time, it's a good question in that I get asked it often. What if we move locations? Can we take it with us? So if they own their building, obviously it's going to be more valuable to keep it there and sell it with an air purification system installed. But if they lease their space and they're not getting credit for it, then they take it with them and they can put it in another space. So we have different types of systems, smaller ones and larger ones, but they're all removable. They all just need energy power to plug them in, and then you can take them with you to a new location and plug them in there. We are working on a consumer unit would be more portable, but right now I prefer the more balanced approach. Put it in the supply duct, and then you'll properly balance the airflow, and you'll properly balance the ions everywhere.
Great. Another question here. Can it be turned off? I know the AT&T Stadium has a retractable roof. How does it work when Jerry opens the roof?
That's a great question, and Scott Woodrow, who runs engineering at Cowboys Stadium, and I are talking on a daily basis because let's just say that we haven't closed on the stadium. We've done the training center, but we're working on it, and it can be turned off. Obviously, if they open the roof and the ions go out the roof, it's not going to be a help to anybody. It's only in a closed environment. Case in point, we're doing the Rams Stadium, Sophie Stadium in LA, and that's an outdoor stadium. Why are we doing the outdoor stadium? Well, every internal space, all the internal spaces, the club areas, the locker room areas, the studio areas, they'll all have the AtmosAir system, but unfortunately we can't do it outside because the ions will just, go up into the air.
Maybe we could all think as we're tailgating too, they pop the roof and we're all
Yeah.
breathing cleaner air, right? It's just coming out to the rest of the party.
A burst of clean air. Exactly.
Yes. All right. Why is AtmosAir better than air purifiers on the market?
Well, there's lots of air purifiers on the market. I mean, I go take you back to the days of the Ionic Breeze, the sharper image product that had a dust collector plate. There's a lot of portable guys on the market, and you got to be very weary of the ozone effect. Make sure that they have their standardization, that they tested for ozone. A lot of these have not, and a lot of these could be detrimental, number one. Then there's ionizers that they're called needlepoint ionizers or negative ion generators. And there you just don't ever seem to get the ions to the actual target because the ions marry up and they die off too quickly. So you never get them to the place where you need them in the space. So there's lots of ion purifiers out there. Be specific, bipolar ionization, and hopefully you'll be even more specific and say AtmosAir, because they have the validation and the verification that goes with it. Not too many companies have sensors that go with the technology. Most companies just try to sell you their product. We're trying to validate and verify everything that we do. And I think that's the difference.
Fantastic. Next question. I think you answered the latter part of this in your presentation, but what is the warranty on the system and how often is maintenance recommended?
So the warranty is 2 years on all of our products, and every 2 years you need to change the tubes to make sure that the product continues. Not that at the end of 2 years the technology is going to shut off. It's just the ions will deplete. The ion production will deplete because the tube is oxidizing, and so it'll start to decrease the amount of ions that get to the space after the 2-year program. So make sure you change the tubes to make sure it stays at 100% for the next 2 years.
Okay, fantastic. This is actually an interesting question too. Does the ionization system increase the oxygen content in the air?
No, unfortunately, doesn't affect oxygen.
Okay.
Good question, but doesn't affect the oxygen content.
It makes it better, right?
Makes it cleaner and better, no question.
Yep. All right, another good one here. Does AtmosAir take the place of media filters?
No, good question, but it doesn't take the place of a media filter. You still need a filter on your return side. It just makes your filter better. I'll give you a case in point. The Staples Center, downtown LA, had these very restrictive MERV 14 filters to capture the dust. Downtown LA, the air quality is not that good. They were changing their filters every 3 months. When we put our system in, they actually reduced their filters to MERV 11. So they didn't make them as resistant, which makes the fans not have to work as hard. So they saved energy there, and they don't have to change them as often. But you still need filters. This is not going to take the place of a filter. It's just going to make your filter better.
Great. Well, I want to be respectful of everyone's time. I think we've been about an hour, so I want to end on one last question here, and again, somewhat pointed and direct, but I think it's a good one. And why we have you here presenting today is how does this system work against protecting against the virus and bacteria, and really just one last time refresh us. What are we really accomplishing here with the
Sure.
product?
Well, against the virus, and certainly we were talking about this before viruses and germs, but how many people die because of the flu? And this is a technology that's going to affect the virus in 2 ways. One, it's going to help keep the surfaces clean so that when somebody that's infected and another person touches that same desk and could become infected, if the ionization process is in place, they're not going to get infected by touching that surface. The bipolar ionization is breaking down, puncturing that virus so that it can't infect. And then when people sneeze and with droplets and whatnot, coughing, that how long that's going to stay in the air, with the ions saturating the air and saturating those droplets, even if you ingest those droplets, you're not going to get sick. And that's because the ions are attacking it at the point. And that's very different than any other technology on the return side. Call it this way. We're more of a seek and destroy versus a catch and grab. Filters are trying to catch and grab. UV lights are trying to zap and destroy there, but we're attacking it in the space, and we're seeking it, and we're destroying it. And we'll just leave it at that. A seek and destroy.
Love it. Well, again, thank you, Steve. We love the information. We love the partnership here. This webinar series really has focused on a lot with disinfect and protect and reopening considerations, and I really feel this starts to close that loop of here's everything that we can do right now that we know of to as we open up, make these environments safe, approachable, and continue to stay open. As we get through phase 1 and phase 2. And again, if there's questions with how do we get wipes? How do we do the disinfectant services? Anything with Atmos here. Obviously, help or just call us directly. We have sales and service at Heartline emails too. Please just contact us. We're happy to help and do more in any of this. And again, thank you, Steve. Thank you for all the participants here today. And we will see you next week. Thank you.